singer says, you all want something to write home about. And this is one of the main reasons why there is public art, particularly in a place that is already a destination. So you may know Times Square as these numbers, where we have over 300,000 people a day, where we have over 1.5 million impressions per day from looking at the billboards advertisements, and where we have over 50 million annual visitors. It's now being called a culturally significant destination. We have over 1.8 million followers across social media. It's number 2 as the most checked-in place on Instagram, sometimes number 1. It's number 3 most captured on Facebook, and it's got a clout score of 93 star. You know it from New Year's Eve, where we have a few people over for a little party to celebrate the beginning of the new year. Or when we have a food market, we actually take over about 3 or 4 blocks and offer up different tastings from over 65 restaurants. Or we also have the largest participation for the summer solstice with yoga, where we have up to 8,000 people a day practicing yoga in one of the most busy areas in the world. But this is what Times Square was. And some of you will know about it, people who are my age know about it, but we find that most of the people on staff at our business improvement district actually didn't know about it this way. So it was nothing but porn theaters, it was nothing but prostitution, a lot of heroin addicts, a lot of young men who were turning tricks. We all know about Midnight Cowboy. It also was the center of these sort of B-rated kung fu films. But Times Square was a place that you didn't want to go to, you were afraid to walk through, and where you could watch people being, well, brutally attacked on a regular basis. So while some New Yorkers will say that they want the old Times Square back, some of them are thinking about feeling a little bit of danger or edge, they're thinking about a place that feels a little bit illicit, they're not necessarily wanting to see a prostitute beaten up by her pimp. And this is very important when you think about when people ask for something, particularly nostalgic. Do they really want what they say they want, or do they want an essence of that? So because Times Square was that, our business improvement district was set up so that it would first just make it clean and safe. And then it became clean, safe, and fun. But really in '92, the main focus was just how could people feel like they would actually want to spend time there. And with a lot of private investment, you may know that Disney put in a lot of money to actually change the Broadway theaters and update them and start to clean up the area. Giuliani has been criticized, the mayor Giuliani was criticized for just how thorough and rampant he was about trying to clean up Times Square. But one of the things that was so important for the district were very simple things. How do you have security? How do you make sure that the whole place is cleaned up on a regular basis? And how do you actually protect the individuals who are often victims there? But after about 20 years of doing that, the Alliance is still going strong, and now it's one of the most expensive places in the world to put real estate. So whether you're financial services or retail, the rents are very, very high. And so what is it that we need to do? If we're one of the most popular destinations already, and we've been able to keep it clean and safe, and now we have like up to 100 police officers in a 41-block radius, we have cameras all over the place, we have public safety officers. Occasionally during terrorist threat times, we have all sorts of special forces teams that come in. It is one of the most safe places in the world now. So the Business Improvement District decided that it had to sort of change and enhance its mission a bit. So it really became about promoting and improving Times Square, and so that it would retain some of the creativity, the energy, and the edge that's made it an international icon for over a century. And in order to do this, one of the things we did is we looked to one of the top branding agencies that at the time was in our district, and they volunteered their time to do a brand analysis. And so we wanted their perspective to think about what it was that actually was appealing to about Times Square that wasn't necessarily the great American mall or the Disney mall, that many New Yorkers have come to accept it to be. And so they came up with some of these key words like historic and cultural significance, or how people perceive New York City is very much synonymous with Times Square. Because in 1904, technology was a beacon of hope, a place of immediate knowledge, and also the place where the first subway system existed. So it's called Times Square because the New York Times settled there. They have their building there. So it became a central point for gathering information and for civic protest, as well as being a place of advanced technological play. What they did is they started to think about these core sort of ideas and these qualities and these characteristics that would relate to Times Square. So it's a place where you make news. It's a place where crowds gather. In taking this job, I realized from research that actually for the last 100 years, there have always been at least 200,000 people a day in Times Square. The crowds are actually not new. Ever since the subway opened, there have been that many people passing through Times Square. A place of sex and desire. It wasn't just a place of prostitution. For a lot of homosexual males, New York was the place that you could come, where you could actually find partners and explore yourself freely. It's about entertaining America. The Broadway theaters are there. There are over 53 commercial theaters in about a 20-block radius. And then the sign of the Times. Our billboards are probably what everybody knows us for. And it's actually a mandate. It's actually a regulation for buildings that you have to keep a certain percentage of illuminated signage. It's actually become a part of the identity of Times Square. So when we were thinking, what is it that you can do that you can sort of rejuvenate or rethink the space? Because basically Times Square was really two large crossroads, a little patch of not a square, but a space to stand. And then there was another space to stand that was at the southern end of these 5 blocks. And so we looked at doing different design charrettes. This is not new now. Many people do these. But the important thing was to get people in who would just blow open the ideas of what could happen there. Because very often we know in these planning processes what can happen. Everybody starts with logistics and what they think they can do, and then they try and develop an idea out of it. But really, logistics shouldn't be leading the process. They should just be part of the process and realizing what it is you want to do. So no, we didn't actually turn it into something that looks like a multi-purpose playground. And no, we don't have large columns of planters. But what it did help us to do by looking at this was to think what happened if there actually was a larger cohesive space in Times Square where pedestrians could gather. And the other thing that happened in examining this particular image with the planters was to say, you know, Times Square is not a natural place. It is the most man-made place. There's not a natural thing going on. So if we're going to even play with something like planters, it's got to look space age. It's got to look like something that hasn't happened before. This is not something we did. These were just concepts to get us to thinking about how it could be different. And some of the important things that came out of that first session were that it would be a big mistake if someone tried to actually make it too dull or try and find a very cohesive landscape. The other thing is you're never going to get rid of the crowd. You're never going to get rid of that chaos. You're never going to get rid of the conflict between the New Yorkers who want to get somewhere fast and the tourists who actually are overwhelmed by looking around. So the idea is, how do you choreograph this chaos? How do you think about things on a very grand scale, but the reality of how one passes through on a human scale? And then also, when you're in the middle of Times Square, you are observed. And it used to be just by the human eye, but now there are cameras that are attached to the screens, and when you're in Times Square, sometimes the cameras focus on you and you will appear on the screens. Also, social media. We have over 17,000 images that are uploaded to Instagram a day that are hashtag Times Square. You are always on view. So all of this research then was pulled together in something called Problems and Possibilities. This was a document that combined the creative design charrette, but also all of the data research that our policy and planning team had done to really understand that the traffic issues were not car-related, they were pedestrian-related. And it was giving the kind of information to the city that would enable them to potentially think of something that could happen to Times Square that hadn't been considered before. But it was the business improvement district that needed to initiate this thought and give it to the city, to give them the reason to even spend time pursuing what they might change. Simultaneously, the idea was, how do you highlight and celebrate any good or positive design that was actually happening in Times Square? So there was a collection of over 100 years and 39 sites. What were some great design moments that happened in Times Square? Because at this time, New Yorkers already started to hate Times Square, and they didn't think it was worthy of anything that was aesthetic or cultural or of quality. When the half-price ticket booth, or the TKTS booth, which just used to be a couple of shipping containers that were plopped at the end of Times Square, and people had to wait in the street to try and queue for tickets, they decided to hold a competition and to say, what could this new structure be? And so they worked with a nonprofit called Van Allen Institute and put forward a competition. And someone came up with something that was far beyond just creating a ticket booth. But it was this concept of realizing that Times Square is the show, it is the stage, it is the theater that is happening, and all you need is a good seat for it. Now, we've got seats like that over here, and we've got them on the High Line, and there are many other places now that use this concept. But I believe this was the first time that it became a sort of contemporary monument and also a gathering place and a suggestion to people about how they could just frame their own movies that were basically happening in front of them. And being able to consider that, and having done all the research, and having started to celebrate some positive aspects of Times Square, was how the bid was able to really lobby the Department of Transportation within the city of New York to say, what would happen if you closed Broadway to traffic? And this seemed like an impossible thing, because as much as New Yorkers love trends, they also do not like you to change things about their city. So many, many New Yorkers had said, this is ridiculous, this is stupid, how could anyone ever close Broadway? Broadway is a thoroughfare, this is impossible, who would want to sit there? So the best thing to do is just to do it, and without the money and without much permission. And so the city managed to find a way to call it a pilot program, or a test or an experiment, and just shut it down. Well, what had happened, of course, because we all know about how things can be delayed, the nice new tables and chairs that were supposed to go out into Broadway and tell everybody that it was a nice place to sit, they didn't arrive. So the president of the Times Square Alliance, Tim Tompkins, said to everybody, just go out and buy lawn chairs. So these things are like the very, very cheap thing that you would buy in any sort of store throughout America when you wanted to be able to put something in your back garden. But as soon as they went down, people just sat in them. And then what happened was an entire onslaught of press talking about this either being great, being awful, being stupid, being the worst chair design. How could they put something crap out there? We care about our city. And it actually started a dialogue in which some of the New Yorkers started to fight for this idea of, if you're going to do this, it better be good. And so it actually swayed a lot of people to get on board. Take it a step further, and then right along, you can see this is the same section of Broadway. And for the beginning of it, they commissioned an artist named Molly Dilworth to paint it. And then they put down the new tables and chairs, and they were able to say, okay, so look, just trust me on this. Maybe we could create a space that looks like something other than just traffic could come here. And while the painting, because if you know anything practical, paint on asphalt doesn't really last that long. But it was enough to really set an image to get it started. And this became known visually as the way that Times Square now is. From all of this, we've decided that we've kind of put this together into something called 20 Principles for Creating Change. Because really, those of you who are in urban sector, and I just came back from the International Downtown Association Conference, people love to tell you that you just need a checklist or a toolkit. And you can just follow this and follow these steps or follow pictures of what's happened somewhere else. And if you do that, you will be successful and everything will be great. But the reality is it's not just doing a particular thing. It's the way in which you think about it. And so basically we came up with these guiding principles that help us with the changes that we make. But in creating a great public space, because Times Square hadn't actually been a public space, we realized there were three things. You can design it, but then that's just the first step. You then have to manage it very well. But then you also need to program it creatively, consistently, authentically. Now these words are being used quite a bit, and it's understanding what is the balance of that equation. But this is what is the sort of progressive development for us about the role of public space and what we want from our human engagement. Now that we've created a space for people to physically gather, how is it we want people to behave? And sitting at the bases of these incredibly large billboards, how is it that we actually intersect with that visual world as well as the real world? And now, as we're all on our phones and devices, our cyborg sort of selves. And so the president of the Alliance thought it would be great to have a public art program. And they began a program, and they started with the traditional route of having an open call and people contributing ideas. And things happened, but nobody seemed that interested. The press wasn't really paying attention, and the artists weren't benefiting from it quite as much. And so when I came into the position, as Vera said, I come from an arts background rather than a city background, I really wanted to have a mission for the program, and I wanted to think strategically about what it is that we wanted to do. For me, I've always been interested in the notion of experimentation, and so it's been that combination between public and art in every way that I can make that equation that can make whatever that definition of public art is. New York is also incredibly rich with arts organizations and cultural institutions. Times Square is actually physically located in the center of New York, so it seemed to make sense that we start to use it as a real cultural hub. And we find a way to entice the contemporary artists to want to use this, for festivals to want to be a part of it. And it may sound funny to you. You might think that everybody says, oh my God, Times Square, I really want to do something there. But when I started this job and I started my conversations, people were like, yeah, good luck. Nobody who's a decent artist is going to want to work there. So you have to think about what it is you have to offer. So it's very important that we've thought about collaboration, that it's important that it's contemporary artists, that it's very important that it's about experimentation, engagement, and that we think about the fact that they are really engaging with one of the world's most iconic public places. So one of the first questions that I will always ask of artists is, why does it have to be in Times Square, and why now? In trying to decide which programs we want to work with, we've come up with these criteria, which have worked very well. Collaborative can be collaborating with the actual environment. It can be with one another as far as performance. It can be with the space, the unexpected. Responsive to place, again, it's Times Square, so I don't want something that can just be done anywhere. I want it to have a reason to be there. Boundary pushing, because we are an iconic place, I want to think about how it's actually pushing how we think and also what the artist has done. Conversational is very important because I'm not so interested in statement art. I don't want just a slogan or an artist trying to just sell a concept, something that opens up a dialogue. And then transparency. We are open 24 hours a day. There is no time that it can be closed off. There is no backstage. How do we think that we're always showing process as well? And then, of course, it's a business improvement district. We own nothing. We own no property. But what are the assets that we potentially have? And how do we sort of get hold of them? And how do we make those partnerships to make it happen? So Midnight Moment is the program that happens on the electronic billboards. We have about 61 billboards that run simultaneously every single night right before midnight. And every month we show a different artist. This is now the world's largest and longest running digital art display. We have At the Crossroads, which are our performances that happen in that space, in those plazas. And they're either installations or performance-based. And then hidden assets are the other pieces that sort of fill in around the different spaces. And so Midnight Moment, as I said, is our consistency. This is the program that happens every single day, except New Year's, because there's that party happening. But every other night belongs to the artist. And one of the reasons for this is that people come to Times Square and they relate it to, the New Year and the ball drop. So if you're a tourist and you're coming to Times Square, at least you have something special that happens every single night as a countdown to midnight. The press, that's been about 1.4 billion press impressions from this program. And the reason why is because it's a collection. I work with iconic artists who are no longer alive, such as Andy Warhol and the Warhol Museum, or the Brazilian twins, Os Chimeos, who created something special. They had never worked in animation before. Or Jesper Juist, who is a Danish video artist, and he does work, for example, with Performa. Or sometimes what we do is we actually associate the Midnight Moment with a different type of happening. So on January 4th this year, Laurie Anderson held a very special concert for dogs. And if you come to the new space, we actually have a virtual reality recording of it. So you too can be in the cold with the dogs. And I'm going to show you an example of what happens when we do the Midnight Moment with a pre-existing work and an iconic artist.
How to Work Better is a retrospective of the artists Peter Fischley and David Rice at the Guggenheim, and as part of the exhibition, Times Square is showing Busey, or Kitty, as part of the Midnight Moment program. And it's a little bit of a welcome back. It was originally shown in 2001 when Creative Time did the 59th minute. And this year, we've got it not just on one screen, but actually we have a cat surrounding us for 5 blocks on 54 screens, silently lapping its milk, its daily activity, looking down on us, perhaps pondering, perhaps not, and really allowing us to look at how the ordinary can become a spectacle, and how a spectacle becomes quite ordinary.
There are other times where we work in a more abstract sense. This is a piece by Richard Garrett in which he actually collected sounds from around Times Square and transposed them into sonic landscapes. And this is actually part of the exhibition at the new space. We also have worked in correlation to what the time of year is. February is Valentine's Day. There are a lot of businesses in Times Square. And so we look at pieces that are going to be bright colored, color associated some way in sympathy or empathy maybe with the holiday, but not necessarily having to directly explain it. For the beginning of spring, for example, we worked with Jennifer Steinkamp, and we had just many, many flowers that were dispersing throughout the canyon. And then there are other times that we really take a look at the fact that it is like a man-made canyon and understand how we can contrast it by giving a very natural landscape. how you can feel like all of a sudden you're walking through a very, very different space. And then other times we do create pieces like this that are a bit more ambitious and try and actually fit it exactly to the architecture of the buildings and create a fictional experience for you. Here we go.
25 seconds. Now 1 minute and counting. Now 15 seconds and counting. 2 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. 3 minutes and 50 seconds and counting. 35 seconds and counting.
Apollo 18, which is a site-specific video installation I made in collaboration with NASA, and it was conceived specifically for the show in Times Square. Apollo 18 is a mission that NASA never launched in the 70s. I wanted to see what it would be to stage a fictitious mission and call it Apollo 18, and to use Times Square as a virtual launch site, and bringing computer-generated imagery, archive material from NASA, which is combined into this very abstract interpretation of what the mission could be, and a very contemporary interpretation of what this mission would look like today, and bringing it back into a communal viewing environment, much the same way people saw the first original lunar landing, when people were huddled around televisions or in public spaces. So the work was conceived in a very specific way, using all the screen clusters and the geography of Times Square to create the sense that you are really witnessing a launch. As people Instagram and share imagery of this launch, although this is a complete fiction, it crosses over into the realm of public consciousness and crosses over into the realm of something that may or may not have really happened or will happen.
So for this particular one, we had one evening. The reason why people were wearing headphones. You cannot have amplified sound in Times Square after 10 p.m. There are actually a lot of noise ordinances in one of the noisiest places. And part of it is because we have up to a quarter of the hotel rooms in our district. So it was one of our first tests in actually handing out headphones that transmit something, so that you could actually hear the entire soundtrack of what he had composed, as well as a piece beforehand that actually explained what it was. But you can imagine that trying to hand this out for about 10 to 20,000 people a night isn't necessarily going to happen. So we try and make it a very special occasion with particular pieces. Our At the Crossroads program, as I said, is really about performances and installations. And on this particular slide, there's everything from the Chinese group, which is called Pollitt Shear Form Office, where they decided to have a volunteer day where 200 of us just mopped Times Square as a sense of community. Or we actually had the first live opera happen outside in Times Square. And instead of choosing something, like Bohème or Fledermaus, we actually did a Wartung. So we decided to, kick it off with some German expressionistic opera, which if you understand an individual trying to make their way through their modern world in a sense of angst and oppression, you'll understand why the Times Square environment just was the stage set for it. And we also worked with El Museo de Barrio to think about a form of their small sort of biennial. But the first big project that we really did was with JR when we did the Inside Out project. Sorry, I'm really bad at this. Why can't I find it? Yeah. There we go.
This project is about your image, your own face. It's about pushing limits. It's about showing that art can go in places where we don't always expect it.
This is a project that's been all over the globe, and of course Times Square is the crossroads of the world. People get their photo, and then a couple of seconds later they have a large print coming out of the booth, and they can paste it here with the team helping them.
Everyone in New York gets to see your picture.
back the printing out of black and white images of people, which really first debuted in Times Square in 1926. And it's being done here in this amazingly modern way.
I've been following JR for years. Everything that he does has been spectacular. He just takes the simplest idea and really runs with it.
How often do you get your head on Times Square and to participate in something that's worldwide?
This is giving a platform and an audience to voices that are perhaps lesser heard or faces that are lesser seen.
Amongst all these advertisements, there should be artwork littered across New York, and I think it's great.
The fact that that project is not sponsored by any brand or any corporation, it's also really important in such a place. To let people take over the center of New York, pasting their faces in the middle of all those brands coming from all over the world.
You see so many different faces, so many different types of people, and everyone just wants to be part of it.
You know, I don't influence people to come from this and this community. They just come, and that reflects the city, that reflects the community. Most of the people, they don't really know how it's going to affect them until they do it, and that's the beauty of it.
And really, that's one of the most important statements, and something that we found. Very often, people don't know exactly what they're going to get out of it. The other thing that we really discovered with this project and a couple of others is that if you want to engage people, you have to keep it very simple. Not because they're stupid, but because the simpler it is, the more room for their own creativity to exist. So this idea about just take your photo, but you can take it however you want, and then put it down, enabled people to think about how they wanted to capture themselves, where they wanted to put themselves, or if they wanted to take it away. And then by doing it and they stepping back and looking at it, it formed a lot of different stories for them. This also happened at the time that was in the spring before our fall election for a new mayor. And we had had Mayor Bloomberg for 12 years, which is a very long time in the US. Usually you can never have 3 terms. You can never go longer than 8 years. So what was very important also was just being able to find a very public way to reflect who was New York and for people to be able to see that. And again, because it's Times Square, the amount of press is exceptional. You know, then 250 million or 300 million press impressions across, 52 international outlets makes a difference. There are other times where we look at projects in relationship to what is going on in the city. There was a little bit of upset because there were we have a lot of costume characters. We have a lot of people who like to dress up in bad costumes and try and get you to take your photo with them and then ask for a lot of money. And everybody seemed to be a little bit okay with this until there were women who were topless and naked, well, not completely naked, but painted, who were then asking. And the response from the police commissioner was, we'll just shut down the plazas, rip them out, and make it back into a street, and nobody will be able to gather, and then nobody is going to try and do this. And one of the things that came out was, okay, you have these plazas, but is there anything authentic about New York anymore? And so the Swiss artist Grotesque had actually built this sort of faux newsstand. And instead of just selling your usual products, it was a combination of wood pieces that were art that just sort of stood in. And then there also were affordable art pieces. And basically what happened is, it wasn't just that. Every day there was a different artist who was a guest clerk. So when you went up to the stand, it might be an artist that you followed, and then through their social media following, they invited people back in. And for about 12 days while we had this newsstand, we seemed to have the very demographic of people that everyone said would never come into Times Square. This is just a short clip. And as I was saying before, there also is that nature of putting on the grandest art form that there is. And really thinking about, again, not just from the bleachers, but how Times Square already is a stage, and how can you take advantage of that. Another way of getting around the sound, like with Marco Brambia's piece, was to look at how we'd use these headphones again. And as I said earlier, Laurie Anderson had created a midnight moment that was a special edit from a feature documentary that she had just made. And that documentary was partially dedicated to the canine units that had been the first responders to 9/11, to the crashing of the Twin Towers. And so she wanted to invite the dogs out, and also the special forces and the canine units to be able to honor them. And though we had just had the big party on New Year's on January 4th on a very cold day, probably not as cold as you had on January 4th, we still had a packed gathering then of New Yorkers and their dogs who came out to basically sort of claim back a part of New York for themselves after all their guests had left. We also have looked at architecture competitions. So Rockefeller Center kind of has their big Christmas tree in New York, and that's very close to us. So we've had a Valentine heart competition for the last 8 years. And this past year, we chose a design that was not just a heart, but actually created a pavilion. Whoops. Here we go again. That actually allowed people to gather, where we held wedding ceremonies and where there were actually performances as well. You should just stay with me. I don't know why I can't do that. So as you can see, it also was a way that it just reflected back what was already there. It was present, it could disappear, it could be a suggestion for people for other uses. And then also, just recently we opened a new piece, because in thinking about street furniture and what we were going to put down next, we were thinking, well, instead of just doing a nice version of what people already know exists, what is it that we kind of need now for our lives? And people come to Times Square and they want to look up at the screens and they want to take photos of themselves. And the German architect Jürgen Meyer came up with this concept of XXX, Times Square with love. And the idea is that these are 3 very large X's, that when a photo taken from above, it looks like we have the XXX of the old porn theaters. But really, these are just a kind of lounger in which people can take their photos, send them to each other, and have a way to relax in what is seemed to be a very chaotic space. Jürgen didn't come up with this idea because we had a specific brief. He really came up with this idea from a conversation that we had, where he was just asking me about what was important in Times Square and what were the challenges. And I say that because I think it's very important that we don't just put out the answer and ask people to creatively answer it, but we kind of put out the questions that we have and allow them to envision. The last segment of work is called Hidden Assets, and this is either odd spaces around Times Square, or their talks, different items. And we've created everything from a play for a sleeping audience in a disused basement to an entire series called After Hours, where we have quite a few of the performances and also the interviews taped at the exhibition, as well as conversations. And so the idea of After Hours was, how do you get a New Yorker to a place that they don't like to go to? Well, you just put on what it is they like to go to, and you move it. So Marco Brambilla had done a piece. We found a small hotel that had this crazy pool that was attached to a bar. And we said, well, what can we do with this? What kind of projection? And so they did that, but we also had this woman who creates an organ out of wooden boxes, who created a whole concert. Nomi Ruiz did a piece at B.B. King's. We had someone named Ryder Cooley and, well, her friend Hazel, who had to be called Hazel. And then we also did things on the rooftops of rooftops. But one summer we did a whole nother series of finding the different rooftops throughout Times Square. I know, you're really glad I'm not selling you technology, aren't you? So the idea, again, is that we have artists who want a space, we have a space that wants an audience, and we put those together. You get new business, and the artists get a great venue with an entire music video that they were able to shoot and to use as a location they never would have been able to afford for their record launch. So the Novotel Hotel, which is, part of a hotel chain, all of a sudden had an experience that never usually happens in their hotel. And people who were far younger than their usual median age, who now knew about a bar and a good location. And as I had started out, the first piece that we had looked at is we decided to put together on the Ides of March a concert of female-led punk bands and call it Primal Screams. The other kind of tests that we have done also with audio is that the Soundwalk Collective created a piece called Jungleized that actually three-dimensionally mapped the space of Times Square to the Amazon jungle. So as you walk through parts of Times Square and you move your phone, you hear different parts of the Amazon, creating a relationship between this idea of the natural jungle and the concrete jungle. And because we don't want to get lazy, we started a residency program. And the idea is really quite open. It's more about artists being able to put forward to us what it is that they would want to investigate. In the United States, there is support for residencies that happen in cities where no one wants to go. But then there are more requests for artists to create projects in much nicer cities. But there's no opportunity for them to actually be able to experiment in them. So we've gone from performance. Okwi Okpakwasili did a series in the square. Or you can see this, in a larger version, in a moving image version by the artist Luc Dubois. And Luc was working with us at the time that we had the scandal about what happens in the plazas and should we keep them. And that's where we came up with this statistic. He was able to actually take all of the images from Instagram and know that we had that many. He also was able to do an equation and realize that 92% of the images that said Times Square were taken in the plazas. So we were able to say to the city, well, if you take out the plazas, that's the kind of effect it's going to have on your tourism. So the result of this programming is that there has been a different response to the role of Times Square. Understanding that it's a recognizable part, knowing that it's the best brands that advertise, but also that people are always thinking about it being vibrant and diverse and how we keep that alive. And as a result, we have a lot of partners. I work with a lot of different people. I work with a lot of different curatorial partners, and I've also been able to involve a lot of our businesses who are far more engaged in what happens in the area. And many of them have taken on programming themselves. But for the last 10 minutes, I wanted to be able to talk with Justin Bettman, who is doing this project set in the street. And he had done it in Times Square. Can I borrow you one more second? There's a little video here to show about the setup. Why can't I do this? I think my fingers don't work.
Yeah, just stay looking over at me.
Ready?
And then as a result, people were able to create their own narratives. But I'm going to bring Justin out now, I promise. And we're just going to chat a little bit about what it's like to be the artist in this space. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Privyet, как дела?
So tell them about doing this project before I called you up. What were you doing?
So I was finding furniture. In New York, people throw furniture away on the street when they're moving or don't want it. It's really weird. Just leave it on the side of the road. And I wanted to build these elaborate photo scenes, but I didn't want to pay for a studio space. So I was like, oh, there's a bunch of walls and streets. I'll just build it on the street, and then I don't have to pay for anything. So I went around New York and started collecting furniture, putting it in my friend's backyard, and then overnight I'd build these photo sets, shoot them during sunrise, and then just leave it. So anyone else who wanted to take a photo on these sets could do that. And then eventually people stole all the items and they disappeared and went into new homes. And yeah, there was like a hashtag that said take a photo, hashtag set in the street. So you could see what photos people were taking, and eventually there was like a digital archive. At 8:57 everything was there, and at 9:23 someone stole a fan. And then anyways, it was interesting to see how it changed over time. And so I had done like 6 of them, and I got an email from Sherry saying, hey, would you want to do it in Times Square? And here I was, having done them all illegally, and then I get a call from the head of Times Square, like the biggest place in New York, and it was really awesome to think about the possibility of doing it there.
I mean, we had a couple of conversations as well then. Like, Justin came in, and I was like, okay, so if you're going to do it in Times Square, then what is it you could do with the project that might make it different, and what is it about Times Square? So talk a little bit about then how you started to refine the sort of brief for what this living room was.
So she, as she mentioned before, wants artists to make it special for Times Square if they're going to do a project there that utilizes it. So I was trying to think of ideas, and initially I was like, what if we could have people's pictures on the billboard? And she's like, definitely not. Then I was like thinking about it more, and I thought that Times Square is really the center of New York, but a lot of people come to Times Square and don't see the rest of New York. So New York is divided into 5 different boroughs. There's the Bronx, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. And so I thought, what if I collect furniture from all 5 boroughs and put it all in Times Square, so that way people can see all of New York when they visit Times Square. So that was kind of the twist I put on it.
And I should just explain, it's not that I own and run the billboards either, just so you know. No, they're all independently owned and operated. So for example, when I do Midnight Moment, we have to deal with 143 people to get approvals and deliver. It's that sort of complex. And so by saying like, oh, it's not going to happen on the billboards, it's because they are interested in profit and profit.
Yeah, she's not a bad person.
But then we were trying to think of what was the right time of year. And we thought April, and you thought of another partner that you were already contacting at the same time I was starting to think about it. And who was that and why?
It's Tribeca Film Festival, and they have their festival at the same time. So she was like, why don't we double it up, and you do it promoting Tribeca Film Festival and letting people know right before that it's happening. So it was crazy trying to do 2 of these sets in like 5 days. But yeah, it all worked out.
And part of it is that people will ask, well, certainly, you know, the press will ask, or people want to know, like, well, why are you doing this, or why do you do it now? And so we were able to say, well, okay, so make up your own movie still. Like, what is the movie that would have taken place on this set? Use your own creativity about it. And that was it. I mean, I think there was somebody out there who was just there to sort of help with the prop or whatever, but there were no instructions or anything.
Yeah, it literally just had a sign that said, take a photo, hashtag set in the street. So I like to keep it pretty open-ended, as she also mentioned, so that way people can be creative and do whatever they want with it.
Is there anything you want to talk about as far as logistics that are a little bit different in a large public space when you're doing it with permission?
Yeah. Well, like being able to anticipate that you have to be ready for a ton of people. And also, she mentioned it has to be able to like stay out at all times of the day. So I had to be ready for like 100-mile-per-hour winds in case that ever happened, which usually I just build it against the side of a wall. But for this, I had like freestanding flats, I guess, theater flats. So that was definitely something I was a little nervous about, but it worked out. I don't know, you guys were pretty accommodating as far as everything else went.
And how did this lead then to London?
So I went to London. I just booked like a trip to London because I was like, oh, I want to do Set in the Street there. And I think as an artist, as you have done one thing successfully, it opens doors for another. So I just walked into like the council, like the government building, being like, hey, I want to do this. And they're like, no way. And I was like, hey, look at this. I did it in Times Square. And they're like, all right, maybe this kid's legit. And then, yeah, anyways, it just kind of opened the door. But that one I didn't do with like an organization. I just kind of like flew there and did it. And I did it in front of Big Ben. And then after that, I went to Berlin. And then I just illegally painted the Berlin Wall and then did like a barber shop there. So that was pretty sweet. And yeah.
And so, okay, now you're here in Moscow. So what's Moscow going to be about? How much can you sort of tell us, and when does it happen, and when do other people get to be on Set in the Street?
So I'm doing it near the new space this Saturday morning. I think it's going to be open to the public starting at noon, 11, 10.
At 10?
Sick, early morning. I know you Russians are never up that early, but maybe this time. Anyways, sorry if that's offensive. Didn't mean to be. Anyways, yeah, so 10 in the morning. Got some cool stuff. I went to some market that's like an hour away, like crazy flea market. Got some sick stuff. So, yeah, it should be awesome.
And okay, so now that you're traveling around while also doing a project, what is it like then as an artist trying to execute a project? What does that help you either learn or teach you about being in a new place? Like, does it give you a place to start to think about how people live or behave, or like what do you look for when you go to a new city?
So one big part of the project is when I show the photos, there's two photos. There's one that's cropped in where you look at it and think that you're inside a living room or a bathroom or whatever the set is. And then the pulled out shot is another like big part of it. So when I first go to a city, it's trying to find what will be like a cool contrast with the inside set that I've thought up and pulling back and realizing that, boom, you're in Moscow. So.
All right, and then two last quick questions. Sure. One, what is it you'd like to tell any of the artists out there?
Keep messing up, and eventually something will stick, and you won't know that it's going to be awesome until people are like, oh, that's awesome.
And then what is it that you'd like to ask of anybody, either government, official bodies, et cetera, to be able to provide or do to make the work easier?
I think here, like, getting permission's really hard, and, like, permitting stuff, I've never seen so much bureaucracy. Not that it's a bad thing, but sometimes it's just hard to, like, yeah, I think allowing artists to do stuff without jumping through so many hoops would be awesome. I don't know. I feel like sometimes that's why I did it illegally in New York, because it's so hard to get permission to do it properly. So if you make it easier to get permission to do it properly, people might be more down to get permission and do it legitimately. But I am doing it legitimately here, so that's good.
We just want the camera to know that it's all happening with permission.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've kind of hit our time. So thank you very much. We just wanted to share with you some weird things that we've done in New York. It's not like it's all the answers to everything, but just to share with you a little bit about what we've done with that space. And I really hope you'll come to the new space. It's great to support yet another strong experimental venue that's trying to play with things and see if they work or what questions they bring up. Because again, the conversational part and the experimentation is so important. And thank you. I've also been having an amazing time here in Moscow. I find everybody really quite pleasant and helpful. So thanks.
Thank you, guys. I'll be hanging out if anyone wants to talk after.
Yeah. Questions? Oh, right.
So
Oh, God, you get to ask
me
us.
now.
We thought we were going to get away and you wouldn't be able to ask us anything. Okay.
Поднимайте руки, если у вас есть вопросы. Мы дадим вам микрофон.
And please raise your hands if you have any questions. We'll give you a microphone.
Or do we just talk too much? Oh, no, I think there's someone back there.
Здравствуйте, большое спасибо за эту
Hello,
замечательную лекцию,
thank
за
you
этот
very
рассказ.
much for this
Wait,
wonderful
we're gonna have
lecture.
We have to get our listening devices. All right, hold on. Ah. Not that I can use technology as we discovered tonight, but go ahead. All right. Let's try it.
Спасибо большое за ваш
Hello,
замечательный
many
рассказ. Было
thanks
очень
for your
увлекательно и
wonderful
интересно.
lecture. It
Вопрос
was
такой.
really interesting.
А
My
каким
question
образом вы
is,
согласовываете ваши
how
проекты
do
с
you
мэром Нью-Йорка,
approve your projects with
особенно
the
когда
mayor
это
of New
касается
York,
перекрытия дорог
especially when the roads have to be blocked for
и
that project
использования больших экранов?
and you have to use the big billboards?
Oh, right. Well, the mayor has nothing to do with the billboards because they're all owned privately. So I have a selection committee of the people who own the billboards and also art curators. And we discuss all of the projects, and we really discuss them, and then make a selection for what's going to go up there. The mayor in the city office isn't directly involved in permissions. They have a sort of right of refusal. But the way that I deal with that is that I put a representative from the mayor's office actually on our selection panel. For some selection panels, I even have like the Department of Transportation as well as a percent for art person, and any other committees, any other departments that might be necessary. So they question us when we're in the process of developing a project. And we get all of the apprehensive or cautious issues addressed up front. Yeah? Anyone else?
Еще вопросы?
Oh, someone right here.
Can I ask about some economical question? How much do the owners of the screens pay as taxes? Do you know?
And taxes. Well, this is actually a big controversy right now because they haven't been paying real estate tax. And then a tax assessor realized that they should be paying real estate tax because the actual signs sometimes are their own property. Like there's a person who can own the sign and a person who owns the building and then a person who actually owns the time on the sign. There are all these individuals involved. So they're fighting that right now. Otherwise, they were being told that they had to pay 10 years in back taxes. And there are only about 2 firms that actually could afford to handle that without going bankrupt. So right now, not very much. They don't really pay sales tax, and they haven't been paying property tax. But I will say that, like our program, they donate over $1.5 million worth of time on the signs a year. So there's really no way that we could do the project without them. And also, because they're privately owned, the city also never decided to make it necessary for the billboards to give any public service announcement time. In other words, there is no obligation to do anything civic on the billboards. So everything has to be a real nice offer for them. I think someone back there.
Actually, that was me.
Oh, sorry,
right here.
over here.
Yeah. First of all, well, thanks for this hour. That was very fulfilling. Actually, I have one little question for Justin. Could you please tell us the location of that Saturday thing you're gonna organize?
On Saturday?
Yeah.
It's at the new space, like on Strasnow Boulevard.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
The Theater of Nations?
It'll be right there. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys should come by.
Okay, thanks.
But of course, make sure that you upload your photos and hashtag them set in the street. Yes. There's someone in the middle.
Hello. I just have a question. I'm very curious. How do artists apply and what their application process looks like? And also, is it totally free for artists to create art in the space?
Oh, wow. I mean, unfortunately, it's free for artists to create. Do I pay the artist enough? Not yet. I usually, when I talk to artists, I explain that I have like a stipend or an honorarium. I don't feel like I really pay true commissioning fees yet. Yes, there is an online application that is open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and you can apply online. If you go to our website, which is timessquarenyc.org/arts, there's a little button there that says, how to become an artist, and there's an explanation about what you need to consider. I don't know, for anybody who's really process-oriented, this is exciting. For anybody else, it's not. But I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the application process because I want people who are either emerging or established artists. I really want people with good ideas. So the application process is really like a questionnaire. It's formed more like if you were having a conversation and the information that you need to know, and it just asks you that. And then you upload some images or samples of work, and then from there becomes a conversation. But artists too often, I would say, spend a lot of time trying to figure out how they should put a proposal together, and it's just not fair. Really, I just need the information as much as possible in some instances of the artist's work to know whether I think they'd be able to pull off what it is they want to do.
Evening. Thank you for the great presentation. Really.
Despite
really
my technical skills? Yeah.
Well,
everyone
has flaws. I was just curious about the future concepts that you wanted to address, maybe some themes that you pay particular attention, and to what extent you think those themes can be presented in Moscow as well. Is there any correlation?
Right. I spent 10 years in England, and they finally drilled into me that actually almost every universal issue in the world is covered in Shakespeare. And I kind of resisted that at first, but I've accepted it to be pretty true. And I think I say that because in some ways I feel like the universal themes apply anywhere. When I put those criteria about collaborative and conversational, et cetera, you can really apply those to any area or slightly adjust them. I think always asking the question whenever you're looking at a project about why does this have to happen in this space is important, because if you can't answer it, then it means it could be somewhere else and maybe it doesn't need to be there. I think we all are dealing with a lot of the same issues. Questions about people being nervous about public art pieces, and do they need to just be something that everybody recognizes? Do there need to be 10,000 of them, or can it be a couple? Do they need to appeal to everybody? How engaging can they be? I think every city is actually dealing with the same sort of questions. The most important thing is also really just to listen to your city and what are the issues. Inside Out, before an election, the project Capitalism Works for Me, True or False, we did right at the time that, in the first time, I guess, in US government history, they had to shut down the government because they couldn't agree on the budget. It was a great time to have a conversation about capitalism. Or, like that newsstand and a few other projects, we did it at a time where people were really saying, I want something that feels like old New York. So I think the best way to know whether it's an issue for the city is to try and gather committees sometimes that hit enough of the different sectors that they get together, and if you find there is a same question or theme that comes up from everybody, then you know it's relevant. But I don't know that there's a definitive sort of checklist per se. We keep talking about maybe we're only going to really nice places or something, but we keep talking about how beautiful it is here.
This place is sick.
There is a really gorgeous diversity of architecture and sense of design that is here. And so sometimes it's important to go away to come back and really look at what you have and understand how to appreciate it. And then the other great tip, I suppose, that I got from working in theater from Robert Wilson was, as soon as you know what to do the opposite. Which is that if it's too easy, that you know it and you feel like it's exactly right, it's not necessarily going to be new enough to open up people's minds and make them think. So sometimes, one of the great things about Set in the Street is that, that living room, and when Justin talks about that pullback shot, that living room sitting in the middle of the biggest commercial mecca, that stands out, more so than a living room set in a suburb. So sometimes thinking about the contrasts and how you can juxtapose them can be quite important. Yes?
Hi. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for this amazing lecture. I have kind of historical question. So as far as I remember, you've mentioned 2 main years of differences that were made. It's 1992 and 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So actually, my question is, was there any like breaking points in the past 16 years, let's say, that changed? Like, for example, the projects that you were telling us about were for the past 3 years. So do you remember, or can you tell us about big breaking points projects from?
Right, so those programs have been going since about late 2012 probably is when I started programming new work. Do you mean breaking points as far as like when I really learned what was working or not working, or what was a shift? Or
yeah, basically.
Yeah, the first 6 to 9 months were a great learning lesson. And at first, the program, I mean, was pretty much me and someone else for like 10 hours a week, and occasionally some other staff, and sort of learning how to navigate Times Square, what to do, what could work. A couple of the first performance projects that we did that were created by European artists who had done a lot of public space work didn't work because they were just too subtle. And one of the most important things I realized very early on is that because Times Square has no visual formality or symmetry, there is no framing, and things just get lost. So they wanted to be subtle and they wanted to blend in, but they didn't understand that they were being completely lost. So one of the things I learned very early was you have to establish some sense of formality so that the eye is driven that way, and people know how to behave just by looking at visual cues. So like when we did the capitalism project and there was a little voting stand, we created a carpet, like just a square carpet, so that people knew then when they approached this that this was an area where something was going to take place. Or we would just find that out of the periphery of your eye, you would place certain planters. Another installation we did with a Cuban artist named Arles Del Rio, we had set up these fences and we just wanted people to be able to climb on them, but they started to treat them with no respect whatsoever because they were too random. And then we put like just corners on the space, sort of like barricades or stanchions, not the whole area, just a little bit of area. And immediately people behaved differently. They all slowed down when they approached the area, and then they were sort of asking if they could go forward. And then it meant that all of our public safety officers could say, oh, no, please, come, as opposed to saying, get off that. And so very early I realized you have to think about how to frame the proscenium when you're in a public space so that people will be able to know what to do without being able to have any instructions.